Soundstripe.
Welcome everyone to another live digital kava session here. We're going to start here in a couple minutes. Everybody get in, get settled, and we'll get going. Drop.
Soundstripe. Soundstripe. Soundstripe.
We are running live on Facebook, YouTube, Patreon, Instagram, and X. So feel free to make comments wherever you're joining in from. We'll be able to see those comments and share them here and answer any questions that come up during the live digital kava session.
Soundstripe. Soundstripe.
Hey, welcome, Caroline. Malo, welcome to the show. We'll get started here in a couple seconds. Just doing some final updates here in the background to Patreon and Instagram. Looks like we're completed that, and we will get going shortly. Thank you, Caroline.
Soundstripe.
Hope the weather's not too cold out there in Aotearoa.
Soundstripe.
All right, we're going to go ahead and get the show started. Talo falava, malo lerei, and aloha. Welcome to everyone to another live digital kava session here on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. Caroline, appreciate you joining in from Aotearoa. Looks like Lotu Mafuleo. Thank you for the shout out all the way from the land down under in Australia. Appreciate the comments. Thank you. Thank you. We're excited for today. It's been a busy couple weeks. And so we're trying to keep at least a minimum one live digital kava session per week. Appreciate all the support we've been getting online on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and especially on TikTok, where we get a tremendous amount of activity there. Today, we got an interesting program lined up for everyone. Today, we're going to have Grok AI from X, Elon Musk's AI, do a analysis on the, I don't know if you want to call them three empires in Polynesia, but definitely three ideas of empires that are discussed heavily amongst Polynesians. The Tu'ipulotu Empire that's attributed to Fiji, the Tu'imanua Empire that's attributed to Ha'amoa, and then the Tu'itonga Empire that's attributed to Tonga, which is highly discussed topic in our circles of our communities across the Pacific and especially in Polynesia. So what we're going to do is we asked Grok a very simple question. We asked Grok, what is the scientific and other evidences for the Tu'ipulotu Empire, the Tu'imanua Empire, and the Tu'itonga, and compare the three and share which empire has the highest probability of existing as an empire and having the most influence. And so that's what we have on the line today. If you're not familiar with Grok, that is the AI that you get when you subscribe to X, Elon Musk's social media platform. He's going to be investing heavily into Grok. It's going to be up to date. It's actually live and up to date information from the internet. It can also generate images. So it's a really powerful tool. Elon Musk says that he anticipates in the next 6 to 10 months that Grok will be up to par with Chat GPT, which also was initially funded by Elon Musk. Hey, Nas, welcome to the show. Tui, malo, thank you for stopping by. Hey, Slick Rick, as always, good to see you. Toko malo, welcome. Malo, Nas, malo. So that's what we're gonna have. We're just gonna walk through that. I know some people on social media have kind of said that it's they kind of think it's kind of ridiculous to ask AI these questions, but I think AI at least scours the entire internet and tells us what actual what archaeological evidence is out there. It also gives a good summary of historical accounts. That's everything online. So, for maybe the generations that don't think AI adds value, but I believe AI is the future. It consolidates a lot of information, a lot of discussions online, and condenses it into a decent summary. So we're gonna walk through this and have these conversations on. Let me see here. On the three different empires here, and I think these are important conversations. So what I did is I asked Grok the question to compare the three empires and then to give a quick summary as to which empire has the most scientific evidence, and then which empire has the highest probability of ever existing as an actual empire. So we'll start with the Tuipolotu, then we'll go to the Tuimanua, and we'll end with the Tuitonga Empire. And as we go through each specific item, I know there's a slight delay going online, but if there's a question, we'll kind of bop back and forth as questions pop up. But we'll start with what a lot of people attribute as the quote unquote oldest empire in Polynesia and the Pacific, and that's the Tuipulotu Empire. Now, this is very interesting. This is really this idea of the Tuipulotu Empire, from what I've been able to kind of obtain from online. This is a largely an academia idea, and it is primarily driven by this term pulotu right here, where basically there is a strong and recognized mythology throughout Polynesia that Pulotu is the spirit world and it was to the west. And so, obviously, from the majority of the relationships that Polynesians had to the west was, Fiji. And so, a lot of academics have said, oh, well, Pulotu must be Fiji. And somehow, some way, they came up with an idea that the Tuipulotu Empire existed. I don't know if that seems to also be kind of tied with the Lapita pottery flow, where he coming through Melanesia and going into Polynesia. So there's this whole discussion of a Fijian empire that started. And so that's why we're starting with the Tuipulotu, because from a lot of people, they say it's the oldest, and that's where we come from. Here's a comment here from Nas. AI is more reliable than the fables people make up online. I mean, and that's what I think is kind of funny, Nas, is some people are like saying, the fact that we ask questions to AI, but these are the same people that'll go and search something on Google and believe anything else that's out there, right? At least AI is a little bit more sophisticated, in my opinion, and actually asks and analyzes the data. And it's the future. I mean, there ain't no denying that AI is the future. In many ways, will challenge how we interact with technology, because AI in many ways will be interactive and do a lot of functions a lot quicker and more efficiently than human beings. And so, yeah, I think it's kind of funny, Nas, but yeah, I appreciate that comment. So we'll start here. It says the Tuipulotu. And Grok says, and remember, as a reminder, this is Grok. Grok says there is limited scientific evidence for a Fijian Tuipulotu empire as described in Polynesian mythology and some historical record. And then he says, here's a breakdown based on the available information. Oh, well, come here, stay on top of our comments here. So Daniel Mafleo, people laughing at people that use AI, Chat GPT, or Grok for research are the same people who laughed at the people that get their information from Google rather than getting it from books when Google first came. Exactly. It's kind of silly here, Daniel Mafileo, to kind of mock those things. So it's funny. I think it's hilarious. I read it and I just kind of like, and these are the same guys who will come and tell me that their grandpa's story alone is sufficient to justify the existence of an empire. Yeah, I think I'll believe AI a little bit more than someone's brother, sister's daughter's story in the garage. So good point there, Daniel. Hey, Wada Bears, the official PR representative of the live digital kava sessions here on the Polynesianized podcast. Malo toko folo puri. I was hey, Wada Bears, man, got tied up with work, man. I was up north, Pennsylvania area, a little colder than I like, but work's been busy and little too much travel on the schedule lately the last couple of weeks. Hey, Wada Bears, malo. So Grok, after he kind of tells us, Grok says, hey, look, guys, there ain't much going on behind the scenes for the Tuipulotu Empire. But he still says, hey, but this is what I can give you from what's available online, right? So he says mythological and linguistic evidence. The term Pulotu is associated with the underworld or a mythical homeland in both Tongan and Samoan myths. Some researchers, like Paul Girotti, hey, at least Grok brings some receipts, right? Some people just fanongo talanoa somewhere and they say, oh, that must be the truth. But at least Grok brings some receipts to the table. So Paul Girotti have attempted to trace the mythological homeland to the location in eastern Fiji, specifically suggesting that Pulotu might be linked to Matuku Island in the Lau group or Moturiki in the Lomaiviti archipelago. This is based on linguistic and cultural connections rather than direct archaeological evidence of an empire. So this is sometimes some of the things we've discussed on the podcast several times. A lot of people, there's a lot of confusion around what exactly is Pulotu, right? And what its role is in ancient Polynesian history. Obviously, on the podcast, we prescribe to Tevita Fale's work. And a lot of people say that, Pulotu is the homeland or the mythological underworld for Polynesia. We take the position that Pulotu is the spirit realm, right? And that's why Polynesians always said it's to the west, because the sun is a big part of the Polynesian perspective of seeing life and the universe. And so life begins in the east because that's where the sun rises, and life ends to the west because when the sun sets, that signifies death. So the sunrise, birth, sunset, death. And so Pulotu, the spirit world, where Hikuleo resides and governs in the spirit world, is to the west. As this gentleman here, Paul Garotti, and some other academics, they take a more literal interpretation of that. And so they say, oh, the homeland must be to the west. I think that may also be driven by Lapita pottery, originating from the west up through, Melanesia and coming into Polynesia. That's another reason for why academics take that approach. So that's what the mythological and linguistic evidence for the Tuipolotu Empire based off of Grok. We slide down to the next one on the archaeological. Let's zoom in on this a little bit more. People like me may be getting a little old. All right, archaeological evidence. Well, there is significant archaeological evidence for the Lapita culture, which is considered ancestral to Polynesians, and its presence in Fiji during the period of 3500 BC to around 500 BC. This does not directly confirm the existence of a centralized empire like the Tuipolotu. The Lapita people are known for their distinctive pottery, but evidence of political structures like an empire is less clear. Once again, academics are trying to take the Lapita origin for Polynesians, tying it in with some mythological beliefs on the concept of Pulotu and Hikuleo, and trying to piece those things together. It's somewhat reasonable to come to those conclusions, but obviously, from our perspective, looking at the social, political, religious, and scientific knowledge of a group of people gives better indicators for the origin of a civilization and an empire than does pottery. Okay, that's just my position. And this is why we don't really prescribe heavily to the Lapita pottery origins, because that just shows the movement of pottery. It doesn't show the movement of ideas and the development of ideas and origin of ideas that resulted in an empire and a civilization of people throughout Polynesia. Oh, Yahweh. Daniel Mafleo says, funny, my middle name is Tuipolotu. Yeah. Hey, man, maybe you are a descendant of the Tuipolotu Empire, Daniel. But yeah, that's pretty cool. So he comes down to the oral traditions here that are related to the Tuipulotu. And our Grok, from what he can find online, says oral traditions from Tonga, Samoa, and parts of Fiji mention interactions and possibly subjugation under a Tuipulotu, hinting at some form of governance or influence over these regions. However, these accounts are often intertwined with myth and are not always supported by concrete archaeological evidence of an imperial structure. And this comes back to um, what Daniel was mentioning. His middle name is Tuipulotu. Slick Rick here says heaps of Tongans with the Tuipulotu last names. This could also be, something related to maybe a structural presence. I mean, I know I'm going to sound biased here, but when we look at the Tu'imanua later on in some of our discussions on how the Tu'imanua came, it seems to be tied to the Tu'itonga. With some of this oral tradition and historical accounts, maybe there's a relationship, the Tu'itonga and the Tu'ipulotu. Obviously, Tonga was heavily involved in Fijian history and politics and military efforts. So there's a real possibility that there's some kind of interrelation to that. But the fact that it's not, Tonga and Fiji have maintained relatively close relationship over the years. And so even with the Tu'ilau, right, having relationship with the Tu'itonga, with the Tupou the Fourth, the king of Tonga right now. But yeah, just kind of interesting there. There definitely seems to be some kind of relationship, but doesn't seem to Grok's expectations of direct evidence. Yeah, here it is, Tuli Tuipulotu, LA Chargers, NFL player with that last name. So it's definitely a very common and recognized name in Tonga and Fiji. So that's genetic. The next one here is genetic and cultural connections. So genetic studies show that there's been significant interaction between Fijians, Tongans, and Samoans, with evidence of intermarriage and cultural exchange. This could suggest that if there was any form of governance or influence, it was likely more of a confederation or loose network rather than a structured empire. So once again, doesn't even show that. I mean, there's genetic relationships for intermarriage, but not necessarily to the extent to show, a consolidation of power and governance through those marriages. Not enough oral history or social history to support that. Well, last real point here from Grok says scholarly interpretation. So really, this is where a lot of this is driven from. Some historians and anthropologists interpret the idea of Tuipulotu Empire as a cultural and mythological construct rather than a historical fact. The narrative might reflect the cultural prestige or the historical memory of influence rather than actual political domination akin to what we understand as an empire today. So, once again, it just seems to be certain ideas. Maybe there was a Tuipulotu that was, had regional influence in Fiji at the time, but not really, no real strong evidence of an actual empire. Nas has here a comment from YouTube. Some observations, Toko. I've noticed that some people have been using a document of Tupou the Fourth letters to Samoan king. Not sure what letter it was, but I'm pretty confident that our Ho'eki of today don't know and they don't really care. Hence why your dad's research is important. I mean, that's something that's interesting there, Nas, is we've seen that letter that they said of Tupou the First, saying that they're progenitors, from Ha'amoa, and it's kind of interesting. There's a couple ways to look at that. Obviously, Tupou the First came into power through the Tu'ikanukupolu line, and the Tu'ikanukupolu has high or strong ties to Ha'amoa. But that does not explain the origin of the Polynesian Empire and the Tu'itonga. That could be interpreted, in my opinion, of Tupou the First just saying, hey, look, we have familial ties to Ha'amoa, and that's why we are interested in maintaining that relationship over there. Hey, Teke Tonga joining here from YouTube. Malo, Malo, thank you for stopping by. Welcome to the live digital conversation here on the Polynesianized podcast. So we'll come down to the last summary Grok has for the concept of Tuipulotu. In summary, while there is a cultural, linguistic, and mythological threads that suggest influence or dominion from what might be termed the Tuipulotu, direct scientific evidence for a historical empire with centralized governance and control over Polynesia is not robust. And he's being kind. When Grok is saying not robust, that's a nice way of saying there's really nothing there, in my opinion. So I think Grok here is being generous. The discussions often blend the lines between myth, cultural memory, and historical conjecture. For those interested in this topic, further reading into a scholarly works on Pacific history, archaeology, and anthropology could provide deeper insights. But as of current knowledge, the existence of a Tuipulotu empire remains more within the realm of cultural narrative rather than established historical fact. So, Grok, as he surfs the internet, as he consolidates all the scientific studies, all the commentary online, and also all the historical accounts, he says there's not too much going on with the Tuipulotu empire. The escape that a lot of people say is, oh, Tuipulotu empire is just so old, and I'm like, yeah, it's so old it may have never existed, in my opinion. I could be wrong, always throw that out there. I'm just looking at, actual, and I'm not just saying just anthropological evidence. I'm just talking about just what can we see, even oral history from other islands. It's not as robust as one would say here, like Grok. But hey, it is what it is. Maybe we'll find something crazy here in the future. But until then, hard really to take any serious position or concept of what exact if a Tuipulotu empire actually existed. And for all intents and purposes, Tuipulotu is a Polynesian idea. It's tied to Hikuleo from our perspective. So it's not a Melanesian concept. It's a Polynesian concept in our mind. So with that being said, we will scroll down to Grok's position on the Tu'imanua. So Tu'imanua, the Tu'imanua Empire, centered in the Manua Islands of present-day American Samoa, is less documented in historical texts compared to the Tu'itonga Empire, but is still supported by various forms of evidence through archaeology, linguistics, and oral traditions. Then he goes into some of his points there. So, it right off the bat, Grok is saying, because I asked Grok, look at the Tuipulotu, look at the Tu'imanua, look at the Tu'itonga, do an analysis, give me a summary of the most important points for the evidence for each empire and how they compare to each other. And so right off the bat, it says Tuipulotu, not much going on there. Tu'imanua, there's a little bit more, but concedes nothing compared to what the Tu'itonga brings to the table. So we'll start with the archaeological evidence. Stelae and monuments. While not as monumental as some Tongan structures, various stone carvings and stelae in Manua, which are thought to date back to the era of the Tu'imanua, indicate a society with compatibility for significant cultural expressions, possibly indicative of a leadership with enough power to commission such works. This is one of the reasons why myself and Masi, Mr. Aotearoa, we highly emphasize the importance of ruins and monuments. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, you guys are holding on to your monuments and ruins. And we're like, yes. And that's a very important indicator of a civilization, right? That would be the equivalent that we typically say is like someone saying, oh, you're holding on to your pyramids in Egypt as an indicator of your empire, or civilization. And we're like, absolutely. Why wouldn't you? We don't even know how they built the pyramids. We don't even know how the Ha'amonga was built, right? And then, according to a lot of the history, some of the stones were brought from hundreds, possibly thousands of miles away, right? I work in construction. Moving 40-ton objects is a high risk work, and it's a very difficult task, even with the modern equipment that we have. So, yeah. And I'll do some commentary a little bit on the monuments that's expressed here by Grok. Hey, Kingpin, welcome, welcome. Thank you for stopping by. Kingpin is joining us from YouTube. Mahalo Toko, welcome to the live digital kava session on the Polynesian Eyes podcast. So a lot of we've done a pretty thorough discussion on the monuments and the ruins found on Ka'u Island in Manua, which is attributed to the Tu'i Manua. Once again, a lot of them not to the scale of Tonga, as Grok says, but even when they look at the Tu'i Manua ruins, they date to like the 13th to 15th century, which is prime. This is Tu'i Tonga at its prime during those centuries. So really difficult to say Tu'i Manua was running the show when the earliest Tu'i Manua evidence from the carbon dating that they have on Ka'u Island, the residents of the Tu'i Manua, really is only hundreds of years old, only 400, maybe 500 years old, and the Tu'i Tonga going thousands of years. So kind of, I mean, even in this area, Grok is kind of showing some archaeological evidence, but not a ton. Mika Losiale, malo ngawe mo tala ho tau tupunga. Hey, Mika, thank you for stopping by. Malo e pito e afe mai. Hange ko lau kolo ape ka haki mea ke tau ki popo lau ya he fiafin. So thank you. Sites of power. Next here by Grok. The presence of significant archaeological sites like the Tu'i Manua residence, Faleula on Ka'u, this is what I was referencing earlier, which served as a political and spiritual center, points to centralized authority. I mean, that's the interesting thing. At least with the Tu'i Manua, there is some evidence of some type of consolidated power. But once again, as far as even in Ha'amoa's oral history, the Tu'i Manua only maybe once, for one Tu'i Manua over a very short period of time, had control even that influenced Western Samoa, the western, farther west islands of Savaii and Upolu. And so the Tu'i Manua, to me, what it looks like is, yes, strong influence in the Manua Islands, but not really, had a difficult time just going beyond those three islands. So yeah, that's where that comes from there. Hey, G-Tang, thank you. Thanks, fellas, for connecting the dots, and it makes a lot of sense from what I studied back then. Love it. Malo. Si, malo abito, G-Tang. Thank you for stopping by. All right, we'll continue with Grok's summaries here from all the data he can find online. Cultural artifacts, ceremonial mats, and other prestige goods. The production and distribution of fine mats, siapo and ietonga, interesting that it has that name, and other ceremonial items which were highly valued, suggest a network of tribute and trade that could have been regulated by the Tu'i Manua. Once again, could have, maybe, possibly. But even then, these are highly recognized under the Tu'i Tonga. These artifacts are often found in contexts that indicate their use in ceremonial exchanges, which was a sign of political prestige and influence. Hey, God loves you, Malo. Thank you for stopping by. God loves you, joining us from YouTube. YouTube seems to be busy today, which is the typical. I remember maybe 2 live digital kava sessions. Facebook was punching above its weight for that show, but today we are back in full force on YouTube. So yeah, I mean, this one is kind of iffy in my perspective because Tonga kind of takes it to a higher level, but yeah, I mean, Samoa does provide some really awesome taovalas and mats, oral traditions. And this is, to me, once we start getting to oral, this is the strongest position that the Tu'imanua has. Um, but once again, it's oral history, right? That alone has its own weaknesses. So, oral traditions, genealogy, and legends. Oral histories from Samoa and neighboring islands claim the Tu'imanua as the oldest and highest ranking title in Samoa, with legends describing its influence extending over wide areas of Polynesia, including parts of Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and beyond. These traditions often recount the Tu'imanua as the progenitor of many chiefly titles across the region. Interesting, right? That's the oral history. That's the big selling point and the strongest position for the Tu'imanua, but it also has certain weaknesses behind that. Water bears, Maui and Tangaloa were Freemasons using square and compass and astronomical knowledge to find where time begins. Well, and that's kind of interesting there, water bears. Obviously, our position is that Tangaloa and Maui are the founding fathers of the Polynesian civilization and empire, and that they were headquartered and lived in Tonga, specifically on Tongatapu. That's why we have Langi on Tongatapu or Tapuhia, and also the Ha'amonga Maui, because that's where they resided and that's where the Polynesian empire and civilization began, from our perspective. Yes, God loves you. South New Zealand, it's 5 p.m. Yep, Mr. Aotearoa is probably busy. It's still in the middle of the day there, but we decided to do one a little bit earlier than our usual burning of the midnight oil. Nacho, malo toko. No masi today. No, Mr. Aotearoa is busy, probably, taking care of the family and responsibilities over there. Moe, malo, welcome to the live digital conversation, malo. Cultural origin stories. Many origin stories in Polynesia reference Manua as the birthplace of Polynesian culture and the first domain of Tangaloa, the creator god, thus lending a sacred status to the Tu'imanua, which is reflected in their continued reverence in Samoan culture. You see, that's kind of interesting. It Grok says that there's a lot of stories that claim Tangaloa as being a god. We don't take that position. Even amongst the Ha'amoa, that a Nacho, yes, Grok is AI. This is X or Twitter AI. So Elon Musk's AI that we use and we have access to. So we asked Grok to do a quick summary for us. We decided to do a show on it, just to kind of see what Grok is seeing online on scientific studies, our archaeological evidence, anthropological evidence, and just oral history. So that's what we're running through, Nacho. So I think it's kind of Tangaloa was from East Palo Alto. Well, he believed that Waihi is America, so Tangaloa could have lived in East Palo Alto and then headed over to Polynesia. So ironically possible from my perspective there, Moy. Hey, Grok says, Grok, Nacho says, oh man, I don't believe anything coming out of Grok. Hey, Nacho, you're like some other ones who have the same thing. But I don't mind it. Grok's going out trying to condense a lot of information into one for us. Yahweh, malo, malo, nacho. It's good. It's good to question. Stay curious. We're not saying Grok is 100%, but this is his 2 cents. We're just gonna listen to his 2 cents there. Oh Yahweh. Water Bear says as long as Tangalo is not from Oakland. Oh Yahweh. Seems like a painful subject, Water Bears. Um, so yeah, I think it's kind of interesting here that they say, a lot of Polynesian reference the Tu'imanua as the birthplace, but then they say it's only really referenced in Samoa. So kind of interesting. Hey, Eddie, welcome for joining us. Eddie says, Maloelele, Tua, just in coincidence or something that was something of a shared culture of the Tu'imanua and the Tu'itonga. The Falefa committed to take care and serve the Tu'itonga and the Fare Tolu, caretakers of the Tu'imanua. The Kava circle for the Tu'imanua was the Alofi Sa, and the Tu'itonga was the Furitaunga, which I could see if the circles were similar, showing similarities and sharing commonality. And that's the thing, Eddie, there's definitely a lot of crossover and overlap and relationship between the Tu'itonga and the Tu'imanua. But just looking at the age of the Tu'imanua, this also seems to coincide with during the time that the Tu'itonga lived in Ha'amoa for 5 generations, with Kaulfo Nuafekai, and then coming back with Tapu Osi back to Tonga Tapu. And so, not sure if, when Kaulfo Nuafekai leaves Tonga Tapu to go to Ha'amoa, he creates the Tu'iha Takalaua to run things for the family on Tonga Tapu. Then I'm wondering, and this is just, an idea, when Tapu Osi leaves Ha'amoa to come back to Tonga, that he possibly could have instituted the Tu'imanua. That's just interesting observation, looking at the timelines of when the Tu'imanua came to be and the movement of the Tu'itonga back to Tonga Tapu. There seems to be a potential pattern there of how the Tu'itonga left people behind and gave titles as they moved their residents around. So appreciate that comment, Eddie. Moy says, how do we clean up all this mess artifacts in Tonga? 100%. We start by just having the conversations, put content online and share it. If there's one thing that the academia and the believers in the Tu'imanua have done well, is they've published the idea a lot better. So trying to combat it by putting out content for other people to consider, put the ideas out. I didn't live back then, but I'm just, we're just trying to think what makes sense, put that content out there and let people come up with their own decisions there. Daniel Mafleo, that's people's first standpoint with new technology like Grok. But watch this, everyone will be using AI for reasons. Yeah, I agree with this. Daniel, I mean, it's inevitable, just the amount of money, the amount of energy and investment, and just what AI is able to do. I mean, just using Grok to me is so much easier and so much more efficient use of time than searching on Google, where it just feels like, searching on Google is like manual labor, and then going through AI right now is like using a bulldozer to move dirt rather than Google, which is a shovel. So 100% agreed. This one's hilarious to Imanua and like the Ufi Mounds younger. This is a good inside joke for a lot of the regulars on the show, right? When we did that in-depth look at the Tu'imanua residents, which shows that Tu'imanua is not only much, much younger, but how oral history can be very misleading. Like we're just going through the oral history section. There were these small mounds of rocks. Oral history said those were the burial places of the super loyal people to the Tu'imanua who wanted to be buried close. But when the scientists went and did the archaeological study, they found they were just Ufi pits. So once again, oral history on its own is not the strongest foundation to be on. Water bears, according to the Mexican Malu tattoos, Tu'imanua. Oh yeah, we Viney Tubbs over here bringing up the taco perspective on the malus. Interesting, lot of drama about that online. Um, you need to get these PhD guys. We've made some invitations actually. We've had 2 interviews done with some tech guys. We've reached out to some guys who are in the academic space. A couple of them have said that they will join us. Um, it's naguhangebe like the old school days. Hey, Io, I'll be there. I'll see you there. And then you show up and they don't show up. I don't know. But we're really hoping that they'll join us. I mean, we're not necessarily going to have a debate, but want to hear their perspective. Yeah, we kind of feel, I mean, PhDs have their position, water bears. But just because you have a PhD, some people think that that means everything they touch is gold. But we are definitely not of that perspective. Yes, Daniel, Ufi pits or burials. Yeah, definitely a funny episode to watch the scientists dig up the quote unquote burials and find that they were Ufi pits. And a lot of Samoans were a little bit, I guess, didn't understand the logic of me sharing that I've been to Samoa many times. I mean, not many times, twice. Masi was there for 2 years. Ufi is definitely not a common or preferred dish in Ha'amoa. So the fact that that is what the Tu'i Manua had, and then considering that the Ufi is definitely the preferred food of Tongans, kind of seemed to be another little funny little jab. All right. Linguistical evidence. It says here shared vocabulary and titles. The linguistic connections between Samoan, Tongan, and other Polynesian languages, particularly in terms of titles and terms related to governance and spirituality, suggest a common culture and possibly political sphere that could have been centered around Manua. Once again, Grok is just looking at patterns, and he says, yeah, if you kind of believe in a possibility of a Tu'i Manua concept, here are some ideas. But as you can see, very broad brush, nothing in the specifics and the details there. So, George Fifita Malo, welcome. Use the Charlie Kirk approach, prove me wrong. Yeah, I mean, that's 100% agreed. I mean, to me, there's just a little too much evidence on one of these empires. Pick your guess of which one I'm saying has too much evidence for it. So, looks like here Morris says Tongan women tattoo. The problem right now is our old family members are passing. Talking to my aunties and uncles who are no longer here. My great grandmother from Mua had a type of malu tattoo on her, and that's the thing. We did comment on this a little bit more, and we actually looked at one of the PhD guys who references Tevita Fale's work, and he kind of indicates that the design in the malu. Well, first off, he says the tattoo was everywhere, right, in Polynesia. And actually, the oldest tattoo kit in the world that was discovered was found in Tonga. And then there's a lot of Westerners who documented Malu and type tattoos going on. So it was definitely a shared historical fact that that was a cultural thing that existed. All right. Historical accounts. Early European observations, while direct European contact with Manua was less documented due to the remote location, there are mentions and records of early explorers about the high status of Manua and the reverence for the Tu'i Manua title, albeit often indirect or from adjacent regions like Tonga or Samoa. So, once again, very localized, not necessarily widespread. Geochemical sourcing. Stone tools and materials. Similar to evidence for other Pacific empires, the sourcing of stone tools to specific quarries in Samoa or adjacent islands can indicate a trade network or tribute system that might have been influenced by the Tu'i Manua, although this overlap with Tu'i Tonga influence complicates attributions. 100%. Like I said, the Tu'i Manua, from all evidence, just doesn't seem to have the longevity that the Tuitonga has, and that's where I think Grok is drawing those type of comments. Says here, the challenge with the Tuimanua Empire is that much of its history is intertwined with or overshadowed by the Tuitonga Empire, and that's the one of the really timeline issues that the Tuimanua has. Not that it whether it existed or not, we all accept that it existed. The problem is when the storyline goes, oh, it was older than the Tuitonga, it was large and through multiple island groups, and even subjected the Tuitonga. That's where the stretch comes into it, right? Where we're like, okay, guys, Tuimanua obviously existed, but there are issues with the idea that the Tuimanua was a center of an empire outside of the three islands of Manua. While these points contribute to the narrative of a Tuimanua empire, it's important to recognize that the nature of this empire might differ from Western notions, potentially being more about cultural, religious, and genealogical prestige rather than direct political dominion. Fair point. Fair point. This somewhat, besides some of the militaristic eras of the Tuitonga, but this is a fair description from my perspective here. Now, last but not least, Tuitonga Empire. We're going to come into what Grok's perspective on the Tuitonga Empire. The Tuitonga Empire, which is believed to have flourished, one of the things that I find interesting here is, number one, he's very careful to not say when it starts and finished, because there is a lot of new archaeological evidence that keeps pushing the Tuitonga Empire and timeline further and further to the left, or older and older. So it looks like Grok is taking the position that these are the flourishing times, not the start times per se, between around 950 BC and 1500 BC or AD is primarily understood through a blend of archaeological findings. So once again, once we get to the Tuitonga, you notice when we went through the Tui Pulotu and the Tui Manua, Grok is kind of using very grayish terms where it says influence, possibly here. When it comes to the Tuitonga, it starts to be much more concrete in the terms that Grok's using here, right? Because there's just so much evidence, and the evidence keeps pushing the Tuitonga Empire to be older and far more widespread than anticipated. While on the Tui Manua and the Tui Pulotu, the more you dig into it, they become more localized and more heavily reliant purely on oral history. Let me see here. Here are some of the most powerful scientific evidences. So once again, this is the first time Grok is using scientific evidence to heavily rely on that to say this is why the Tuitonga is a reality, right? Not as concrete when it speaks about the Tui Manua and the Tui Kanukupol, the Tui Pulotu. Evidence supporting the existence and influence of the Tuitonga Empire. Number one, archaeological evidence. You notice multiple points for one. Okay. First, monumental architecture. The presence of monumental stone structures like the Ha'amonga and Maui Trilithon on Tonga Tapu, which is often related to the era of the Tuitonga kings. These structures indicate a society with the organization necessary to undertake significant engineering feats. Right? This is why ruins are so important, because they represent consolidated power that can organize labor, sufficient scientific knowledge, and just some type of ability to develop a idea into a reality, because that physical representation of a ruin represents so many things. It represents power. It represents organization. It represents technology. It represents blah, 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 blah. I mean, the list goes on. This is why when we look at the pyramids in Egypt, we say these people were up to something interesting. No other island in the Pacific comes close to what you can find on Tongatapu. And you find it in the other islands as well. And even the monuments you find in Ha'amoa, Wallace and Futuna, and in Uvea and those places, even some of the stuff in the Cook Islands, where was it Mangai, I think they say, oh yeah, the Tuitonga, the Tuitonga, the Tuitonga, the Tuitonga. So it's throughout Polynesia. And another one is the Ponuatanu, over 100 acres of civil engineering, where ocean was turned into land, right? Reclaimed land. So we're talking about some serious capabilities there. Number 2 over here, it says burial sites, elaborate burial mounds, langi, for the Tuitonga kings at Lapaha Tongatapu suggest a centralized power and a tradition of honoring rulers with significant monuments. Once again, every meaningful empire, every meaningful civilization has monuments. Stone tools and exotic artifacts. Analysis of stone tools and other artifacts indicates long-distance trade networks. For instance, tools found in Tonga made from Samoan or Fijian basalt show the interconnectedness of these islands, pointing to a robust system which the Tuitonga might have facilitated and controlled. Now, to go even deeper, we've gone into one of these studies that they did in La Paja, and they found all these stone axes. 65 to 70% of them were foreign or exotic, right? From Fiji, from Ha'amoa, Cook Islands. And so this is to show just how centralized this power and this trade and influence was. You don't find that on all the other islands. In Ha'amoa, 99% of the axes there are from Ha'amoa. You go to Fiji, you go all over Polynesia, a lot of just local sourced, right? So really, really powerful examples there. Number 2, transoceanic trade and material exchange. The basalt axes, right? The distribution of basalt axes, which are tools typically made from rocks found in Samoa across various Polynesian islands, including Tonga, supports the idea of an expansive trade network under the Tuitonga's influence. Ceramics and other goods, the spread of lapita pottery and other cultural items across a wide area from Tonga to Fiji and beyond indicates cultural and possibly political hegemony. 3, historical accounts and oral traditions. Captain James Cook's observations. Cook's accounts from his visits in the late 18th century describe Tonga's complex social structure and the prestige associated with the Tuitonga. While this is more historical than scientific, but at least it's historical, his observations corroborate the oral histories about the Tuitonga's authority. Let's see here. There's a lot of comments going on in the background here. Here's one here. Question: did the researchers ever say the types of urbanizations that were going on? Yes. If you look up we did an episode on this T-style. I think it was the Mala'i Wakapuna Mound, where they found a urban center, kind of in that Fuamotu area, that showed urbanization early in Tongan history, and actually pushes back a lot. I think it was 700 years in that area. No, it was like 900 years earlier than they thought that civilization had started on Tongatapu. I'm thinking about the Toloa one that also showed urbanization as well there. So yeah, there's quite a few different studies, T-style, that shows urbanization happening in Tonga, in the early 1st century, which is quite remarkable. All right. Oral traditions. The genealogies and narrative passed down in Tonga, Samoa, and other Pacific islands speak of the Tui Tonga's influence and political structure involving tributes like the Inasi ceremony where goods were offered to the Tui Tonga, right? And this is also something that Captain Cook observed as well. He has drawings of the Inasi happening, which is why Grok is saying, yeah, this has a lot of influence and standing. Geochemical and archaeometric studies, sourcings of materials, studies using techniques like X ray fluorescence, XRF, or neutron activation analysis, NAA, to source materials of artifacts can trace back to the origins of these materials, often revealing extensive trade routes or tribute systems that align with the historical period of the Tuitonga Empire. Once again, the Polo Polo and the Inasi twice a year, where throughout Polynesia, all the different islands, we even spoke with, or not spoke, but we were messaging with a gentleman from New Zealand who's Maori, who grew up, and he says his ancestors even have references to going to Tonga to give tribute on the Inasi and Polo Polo to the Tui Tonga. Very interesting. I wasn't aware that that is some of the oral history with the Maori people until this gentleman shared it. 5, linguistic and cultural similarities, shared cultural practices, the similarities in language, religious practices, and social structures across the Polynesian islands, particularly in areas traditionally linked to Tonga, suggest a cultural diffusion that could have been facilitated by the Tui Tonga's influence. Kind of interesting there. So, in summary, these evidences collectively paint a picture of an empire that not only had significant control. You notice the difference in the description here of the Tui Tonga versus the descriptions that were given for the Tui Polotu and the Tui Manua. It's very vague and, kind of beating around the bush. Yeah, possibly, maybe. But when it comes to the Tui Tonga, it is way more direct of its reality, right? The evidences collectively paint a picture of an empire, there's no doubt whether it existed or not, that not only had significant control, centralized power over its immediate region, but also engaged in long distance trade and cultural exchange, influencing a wide swath of the Pacific. However, the interpretation of this evidence can vary, and the concept of an empire on the traditional Western sense might not be perfectly fit the Pacific context, where influence was often more about cultural and economic dominance rather than direct political control. Possible, except the only thing is we have war forts in Wallace and Futuna and other areas. So this Grok's trying to take a, unbiased summary of what he sees online. But Grok definitely, Nacho. I thought despite your doubts, but Nacho here sees that it seems like Grok knows what he's talking about, the Tui Tonga Empire. Hey, maybe he will convince you, Nacho. Maybe he might just convince you to give him a shot. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. Wanted to just kind of sit down, walk through Grok's position on the Tui Tonga, the Tui Kanukupolu, and the Tui Manua empires. There's definitely a lot of discussion online. I know a lot of people, when we first started digging into the Tui Manua and the Tui Pulotu empires, a lot of people were like, you guys just trying to ruin the history. And we're like, no, man, we're just asking some questions. We're trying to follow the evidence wherever it takes us. But it feels like, and maybe I just don't worry about it too much. But it feels like there is less resistance because the evidence is just overwhelming, right? Some of the studies we brought up, there's a couple other studies we'll look into, but also just when you just sit back and you think about it, that's just kind of difficult to resist. God loves you. Maori has ties to Easter Island. I know Tonga does. Maybe there's 100% agreed with that. God loves you. That's kind of interesting. There is definitely a relationship there between all three of those, Tonga, New Zealand, and also on Easter Island. Hey, so looks like before that, we look like Nacho might be warming up to AI and giving it a shot. Daniel, who's a fan of it, says even use other AIs like Chat GPT, you will get the same results as Gronk. Yeah, because when they just look at the data, it's just that to me is what's kind of interesting when you look at some of these conversations online, and also people who get overly defensive or sensitive about it. Is hey, I'm not saying it's a shut door that it will never be possible, but I'm just saying it's highly unlikely, right, for the Tui Pulotu and the Tui Manua to have actually been empires. And the evidence is overwhelming, that the Tui Tonga is not only older than both of them, but that the Tui Tonga is also maybe the person who generated or created the Tui Pulotu and the Tui Manua. Um, That's an interesting one to think about. I'd be surprised if Gronk starts saying tattoo cultures from Tonga and Samoan folklore says that a Fijian king gave them the tattoo, but the Fijian kings were well, and that's actually kind of interesting. T style. I had always just thought that Tonga's influence in Fiji was in the Lao group, but we watched a documentary made in Fiji of Tongan influence into mainland Fiji for hundreds of years, right? So it wasn't just in the Lao group, but it actually infiltrated um, into mainland Fiji way, way earlier than I had ever thought, which was quite mind boggling. And maybe that's the case, right? A lot of the war tactics that were done in Fiji were brought by Tongans from Fiji to Tonga in the times of civil war. Could have been the same thing. A Hafakasi Tongan Fijian bringing it from Fiji to Ha'amoa. Very possible. Mika Locialis says that the story of two Tongan voyagers who went to New Zealand and found the moa and brought it back to the Tuitonga. Yes, there is oral history of that story. Mika, Mr. Atearoa Masi shared that, and there's actually locations in Tonga, I guess, called Halamoa or something of that sort that is tied to the story of when the moa was brought back to the Tuitonga. If Fiji was under Tongan dynasty, who would remember after 300 years? Yeah, that's a fair point. One could make the claim that even around the time of Tupo the First, right, with that Tatui Lau, that what's his name? Sorry, escaping his cousin. That went, they sent him to Fiji. His name's Henere or Enere, but became the first Tuilau over there. Think people just need to go see the Tuitonga built and compare to all the other so-called dynasties. You'll see the power they had. And yeah, to me, it's just hard to deny at some point. You're right. It's just hard to deny that. Yeah, you go to Tonga and go to Samoa and go to Fiji. Well, that's the thing. A lot of these forts, like that one I was telling you about, that documentary, one of was it the Tavuni or Tavuri fort, were built by Tongans in Fiji on the mainland, right? And then also the mounds in Ha'amoa, high probability that was built with the Tuitonga or for the Tuitonga, and also the Marais and all that other stuff. Very interesting. Very interesting. Well, okay, guys, just wanted to do a quick, short 1 hour show here, live show with everyone, just to kind of walk through what Grok's position is on the Tuitonga Empire, the Tui Manua, and the Tui Pulotu. And as usual, Tuitonga is by far with flying colors, not only older, powerful, more influential, and high probability that I mean, I think that Tui Tonga probably instituted the Tui Manua and the Tui Polotu, just like it instituted the Tui Hatakalaua and the Tui Kanukupolo. For whatever reasons, that was something that was definitely developed. Another indicator that, there's a Tui Manua, there's a Tui Polotu, one on those, but in Tonga, there are multiple Tuis. There's the Tui Pelehake, which I just learned later was the oldest brother of Aoetu. That's where the Tui Pelehake comes from. You got the Tui Tonga, you got the Tui Kanukupolu, you got the Tui Hatakalaua. So once again, density of titles means density of power, and nowhere else in Polynesia are the ruins, are the oral history, are the compilation of power and authority and influence than in Tonga. And once again, I want to reiterate, we say this 1,000 times, but I think it's important. Everybody understands we say Tonga, we say Samoa, we say Wallis, Futuna, Cook Islands, but in reality, that the idea of those being independent nations didn't exist. Those are nations that came out of the Polynesian nation being divided by Europe. I'm not saying right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just the nature of colonization, that they became independent nations. But under our ancestors, that was one people. That's one of the things that Captain Cook made very clear when he visited all the Polynesian islands. He says this is a nation. He'd said it's a nation. They have all the same technology. They have the same language. They have the same capabilities, a lot of similar social and cultural relationships. And he even said that they were one people, one nation. And I believe that. I believe that all Polynesia was one nation. So another comment here, that Tui Hateho, yeah, went to Fiji to fun for fight. Can't say any other islands did that because they wanted to battle. Yeah, there's a lot of oral history behind that as well, more so. There's another Tui Hateho, right? So really interesting. Just wanted to kind of jump on. We know it's been a busy last 2-3 weeks. We're trying to keep at least one live. We've conducted 2 interviews, guest interviews. We're working through those. We'll be releasing those here shortly once we get the final edits completed. So we'll continue to work with that. We also have other interviews tied up as well, and as well as other series that we have. I'm working on day 2 of the creation, and then also the other interviews. So we're continuing to build the content. We appreciate everyone's support. Shit, what a bears. Tui Vaini on top all day. Maria Vaini Poto. Anyways, as always, guys, appreciate all the support. Appreciate all the comments, the interactions. Makes the show a lot more fun, bringing ideas and thoughts from everyone that's joining us. As always, we say stay curious, be bold, and don't be afraid to ask questions. And let the truth take you wherever it takes you. Have a great weekend. Till next time. Peace.